authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to welcome all members and witnesses to today's hearing. I know that the members have participated in similar virtual hearings this year with the full committee, but just as a reminder of some of the rules and requirements here to make this presentation as engaging as possible. If you're experiencing any connectivity issues, make sure you or your staff contacts our designated technical support so we can work through those. And to ensure that members and participants can have robust engagements, we always ask members participating remotely to continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless you have some sort of connectivity issue or some other matter that might prevent you from being on camera. Today, we will be using a virtual timer to keep time. And if you want to keep that timer in your view, select grid or focus view, move your mouse over the second thumbnail from the right, click on the white circle, select lock participant, and from the list of participants, you can choose hearing timer, and this will keep the timer in your view. Now, when you're recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and just pause for 2 to 3 seconds before you begin speaking. That ensures that all your words are captured on camera. Now, if you wish to have a document inserted into the record, just ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email a document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov, and it will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Any questions about the procedures before we begin? Well, hearing none, we will proceed. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today's joint hearing by the Oversight and Investigations and Technology Modernization Subcommittees will examine the ongoing attempts by the Department of Veterans Affairs to modernize its supply chain. Each year, VA buys billions of dollars of vital life-saving medical supplies needed for our nation's veterans. The department has the nation's largest integrated healthcare system and must have a modern and effective supply chain. However, during committee hearings in recent years, we've continually heard about the weaknesses of VA's purchasing and inventory management systems for medical supplies. The Government Accountability Office and the VA's Office of Inspector General have testified during those past hearings about how the department's antiquated medical supply chain results in increased costs and wasteful spending. Also, the inability of its hospitals to keep track of their inventory can lead to shortages of critical needed supplies, sometimes resulting in canceled surgeries and situations where patients are put at risk. The Government Accountability Office added VA acquisition to its high-risk list in 2019, largely due to medical supply chain problems. Now, it's noteworthy that the antiquated purchasing system has led employees at VA hospitals to frequently turn to government charge cards to purchase as much as half of their medical supplies. This practice means that the department can't fully make use of its purchasing power to lower prices. It also results in much reduced visibility and accountability over the nationwide inventory. The pandemic and the resulting worldwide shortage of medical supplies, including basic items such as masks, gloves, and gowns, placed further strain on VA's hospitals and underscored the need for a modern supply chain. The Inspector General issued 3 reports during the first half of this year with examples of VA medical facilities around the country that either ran out of PPE or were running low and had to ration. Now, it's important that we acknowledge that the VA hospital staff and employees who've worked tirelessly over the last year have done a great job in procuring needed medical supplies. These were heroic efforts that avoided large-scale shortages. But moving forward, we can't continue to rely on heroic efforts alone by the staff. Clearly, the VA needs a modern supply chain system. Our veterans and healthcare employees deserve nothing less. Unfortunately, VA is years away from this goal. Let's go through some of the recent history. VA launched a major initiative to create a modern medical supply chain called the Medical Surgical Prime Vendor Program in 2004. However, it faced many problems and shortfalls and was never completed. Then in 2016, VA tried a new modernization attempt called the Medical Surgical Prime Vendor Next Generation Program. Again, things did not go as well as hoped. Next, VA tried to launch the Medical Surgical Prime Vendor version 2.0 program. However, that initiative also saw delays. But there's more. In the latter part of 2020, VA announced it would replace its Medical Surgical Prime Vendor program with a Department of Defense acquisition system. VA quickly set about expanding the DoD system to full-scale implementation across the entire department, starting with a pilot project. An Inspector General report released last week points out that there were major problems with the pilot project to try out the DoD system at the Lovell VA Hospital in North Chicago. As the Office of Inspector General will testify today, DoD's Defense Medical Logistics Standard Support, or DMLS system, did not meet the more than 40% of the high priority business requirements identified by level staff as essential to successful operations. Additionally, in August of this year, the U.S. Court of Federal Claims issued a ruling that VA's attempted transition to the Department of Defense medical acquisition system conflicted with current law regarding VA procurement rules. This halted the initiative. I should point out that despite the court decision this summer, VA is attempting to restart the effort with the hope that it will pass favorably within the courts. So you heard that correctly. VA has made 4 modernization attempts since 2004, and now it will attempt its 5th. This restart of the previous failed attempt will occur before VA has procured a comprehensive strategy for its current plans to modernize the supply chain. And it's not clear how VA's latest attempt will pass the test with the courts. So we need to hear from VA how its current plans for creating a modern medical supply chain will prove successful. As I repeatedly stressed last spring, the department needs a modern and effective acquisition system, and Congress needs to have a full understanding of its plans before further decisions are made. I look forward to the hearing from all of our and participation from all of our witnesses today. And really, we got to do all we can here to give veterans and VA employees a medical supply chain that's reliable, effective, and efficient. And with that, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Mann of the O&I Subcommittee for 5 minutes for any opening comments that he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. And I also want to thank all of our witnesses, both new and returning, for participating today. And Chairman, thank you for hosting this joint hearing here. I'm also glad that we're joined by our colleagues from the Technology Modernization Subcommittee. Good to see you, Chairman Mervan and Ranking Member Rosendale. The Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee started this year with a hearing on VA's medical supply chain. It is fitting that we should return to this subject today. The good news is the investments made last year have dramatically improved the availability of medical supplies throughout the country. The terrible shortage of N95 masks, surgical gloves, and other personal protective equipment no longer exist. Unfortunately, lockdowns and hits to the labor market have caused supply chain blockages to develop in other sectors of the economy. The bad news is the goalposts for all of VA's big ticket supply chain initiatives have moved farther away. Implementation of DIMLs, the regional readiness centers, and the medical surgical prime vendor contracts are all further delayed or stalled altogether. And based on the new information we've gathered since the hearing in March, I'm skeptical these programs' business cases still stand scrutiny. As OIG has reported, VA fully implemented the DIML system in North Chicago in August of 2020 after almost a year's delay, and the results are not encouraging. DIMLs failed to satisfy nearly half of the medical center's business requirements, and solutions are in the works for only a handful of these gaps. This should come as no surprise. A study the VA commissioned from MITRE Corporation in 2018 predicted this. It scored DIMLs and Logical behind 4 commercial supply chain management systems. It also estimated the cost of DIMLs higher than 2 of these commercial systems. In our previous hearing, I urged VA witnesses to consider waiting for Logical to become available rather than pressing forward with DIMLs, only to replace it later and drive up the cost. That it was rejected, and we now know that Logical is delayed until 2025. VA's present course appears destined to produce more disappointing results. Until VA can demonstrate the DIML system suitability, we would be negligent to allow more than a limited deployment. I still believe VA has a compelling need for a modern inventory management system. I encourage our witnesses to re-examine the most compelling options that were apparently ignored and buried in 2018. Turning to the regional readiness centers, I do not think anyone would dispute that VA has an extreme imbalance of warehouse space to inventory and demand for that inventory. Over the past year, VA seems to have tumbled from temporary warehouses to temporary warehouse, moving into facilities that were available on short notice rather than facilities that necessarily meet the need. I understand the VA has spent roughly $180 million on a temporary warehouse in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. It spans over 860,000 square feet, but VA is only using about 10% of that space. VA also has 3 other warehouses, 2 nearby in Pennsylvania and 1 in California, that handle a minuscule amount of inventory. What concerns me the most is the very low level of demand from the medical centers for the personal protective equipment stored in the regional readiness centers. I previously had expressed my apprehensions that the regional readiness centers would turn out to be places where inventory sat unused, just like the supply depots VA abolished 30 years ago. That may not be the plan, but it clearly seems to be what's happening now. Ranking Member Bost, Chairman Pappas and I put forward HR 2082, the Supply Chain Resiliency Act, that would allow the VA to partner with DoD to gain access to its War Stopper program. Our goal is to use vendor-managed inventories to reduce some of the risk of physical inventories at VA warehouses. We've been extremely patient with the regional readiness centers and waited nearly 6 months for VA to answer our questions about the War Stopper program. It's disappointing to me that our requests have been repeatedly ignored. I think the time has come to pass a legislation with or without VA's cooperation. Finally, I'd like to mention the medical surgical prime vendor contracts. VA struggles managing the program are well documented by GAO and others. I can't understand why our witnesses sought to use DoD's MSPB contracts and phase out their own. However, the Court of Federal Claims ruling leaves no doubt that unless the VA comes up with a completely different way of achieving its goal, it violates the law. I've never heard of a judge before who was so exasperated by a case that he had to quote a poem to express his frustration. He wrote in his decision, and I quote, "If there can be a literary analogy to this government procurement, it would be Longfellow's The Wreck of the Hesperus, which chronicles a prideful sea captain's avoidable downfall on the rocks of Norman's Woe." I think it's appropriate to extend the analogy. VA leaders need to change course before the whole medical supply chain crashes on the rocks. It is not too late to do this, but time is running out and is of the essence. If they will not, I fear the VA supply chain will become more expensive, but not more resilient. We cannot allow it to fail again when veterans and employees are relying on us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Mann, for your comments. And now we'll turn things over to the chair of the Technology Modernization Subcommittee, Frank Mervan, for 5 minutes for any opening comments that he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas and Ranking Member Mann, and of course, Ranking Member Rosendale. I would first want to start off by thanking you for agreeing to conduct this joint hearing with Technology Modernization Subcommittee. As I am sure our witnesses are aware, VA is undertaking 3 large modernization efforts of IT programs at the same time. I've highlighted in our hearings this year the trouble that the Ehrm program has been experiencing and how that is affecting VA's other modernization efforts. Case in point, our hearing today is going to delve into a supply chain modernization effort that has suffered through a number of failed attempts. The latest attempt, started in 2018, was to adopt a solution the Department of Defense has been using since the 90s, in which is planned to be decommissioned in 2 years. I'm not certain how the previous administration considered that a modernization effort, but here we are. To make matters worse, the VA Office of Inspector General released a report on November 10th, which stated that this system did not meet more than 40% of the high priority business requirements identified by staff as essential to successful operations. I look forward to the Inspector General's testimony today to provide more insight on the challenges that this system is providing staff at this pilot site. As our GAO witness can attest to today, VA has historically struggled to successfully manage IT programs. In 2015, VA's management of IT acquisitions and operations were added to the GAO's high-risk series and remain there. I think this supply chain modernization effort is a perfect example of contracting gone wrong. In a briefing before this hearing, a representative from the VA stated that the move to Defense Logistics Agency contracts was primarily because VA is bad at contracting. I don't think that's an acceptable answer given that Congress appropriates billions to VA every year in every IT modernization effort that involves contracting. I'm pleased that VA has offered the Chief Acquisition Officer, Mr. Parrish, to testify today to present his plan to fix this. The issues with supply modernization and the electronic health record modernization are symptoms of a larger problem. The VA does not manage these programs effectively and have allowed siloed decision-making for far too long. It's my hope that this hearing will begin larger discussions for a legislative solution to address this partnership with Mr. Parrish. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to their testimony. With that, Chairman Pappas, I yield back my time.
Well, thanks very much, Chairman Mervan. And I'd also like to recognize for 5 minutes the ranking member of the Technology Modernization Subcommittee, Ranking Member Matt Rosendale. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas, Chairman Mervan, and Ranking Member Mann. My colleagues have described the situation in VA's medical supply chain, and I will get right to the heart of this matter. The supply-demand imbalance of this particular market corrected itself nearly a year ago. Meanwhile, the federal government's solutions to the problem are just getting off the ground. These solutions always come in the form of expensive contracts and new IT projects, and we are dealing with this at the hearing today. There's a common thread in the DMLSS system, the regional readiness centers, and the medical surgical prime vendors contract, and it's very frustrating. VA seems to be dead set on shoveling hundreds of millions of dollars a year into these projects, regardless of whether they have a credible business case, whether the courts say they are lawful, whether they have capable leadership, and whether they are actually improving the situation in the field. It is disturbing philosophy of spend money first, demonstrate results later, or not at all. The justification for selecting the DIML system seems to have been manufactured to support a predetermined conclusion. I question why VA did not provide these studies to the committee in 2018 when they were completed and when the decision was being made. There is no way to read the MITRE Corporation analysis of alternatives as anything but extremely critical of DIML's system. VA's own analysis of alternatives seems to have been cooked up to compare DIML's to a clearly inferior product so as to guarantee DIML selection. It only looked at one other option, not the 4 commercial systems that MITRE examined. The DIML's has the hallmarks of a pet project, much like the electronic health record modernization. The feedback from the initial site is bad, but the people leading and managing this system are cheerleading it to deploy it in other facilities. I understand the VA has spent over $270 million on this system already, and the life cycle cost is $2.8 billion. We need to shut it down before it becomes another money pit. Then there are the regional readiness centers, which seem to be a situation where naive shoppers with too much money to spend had a slick salesman talk them into buying a timeshare unit that they will never use. There's a good reason the VA to hold greater inventories of medical supplies. I understand the decision to build in redundancy and increase resilience. However, there's absolutely no reason to be paying for a gigantic 860,000 square foot warehouse. That is 20 acres, people, 20 acres of warehouse, in addition to 3 other warehouses that all sit nearly empty. This is another $180 million wasted that could be providing much needed care to our veterans. If the VA insists on proceeding with this regional readiness center concept, the warehouse footprint has to shrink dramatically. It makes no sense logistically or financially. Finally, I want to turn to the medical surgical prime vendor contracts. This is truly a Byzantine maze of government bureaucracy. An attempt to make the process of buying medical and surgical supplies more efficient and economical has turned into an endless series of false starts, lawsuits, and broken promises. It has driven up costs and made the logistics staff's job more difficult. At this point, I don't claim to know what the path is out of this mess or what it looks like. I do know that any private company that made such cavalier decisions, breaching multi-billion-dollar contracts, would soon find themselves out of business. I also know that business executives who disregard the advice of their attorneys and brazenly roll the dice in court would soon find themselves booted out by the board of directors. And we on this committee are acting as that board. I have serious questions on if we should continue to allow the same people who made these mistakes in the past to be in a position to continue to make more at the taxpayer's expense. And yes, Mrs. Kramer, I am referring to you. I'm deeply concerned by the VA's pattern of risky gamuts and the MSPV program. This is not even the first time a court has ordered a halt to what the VA executives were attempting to do. VA's planning and decision-making process is clearly broken with respect to these contracts. If we're going to expect to get better results in the future, we have to begin by fixing that right now. Gambling with taxpayers' money and the medical supplies that our veterans rely upon is unacceptable, and we must find a way to break this bureaucratic mess without delay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Rosendale, for your comments. And we now have full committee chair Mark Takano participating in today's hearing. And so I'd like to recognize him for 5 minutes for any opening comments. Chairman Takano, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. And normally with a joint committee with so many chairs and ranking members, I would waive my comments, but this is such an important topic that I do want to weigh in. I think our hearing today is an important opportunity to highlight that as we move forward, we don't forget the lessons that we've learned that have come from dealing with a global pandemic. At the start of the pandemic, the flaws in VA's ability to track and obtain medical supplies highlighted the need to modernize VA's supply chain. The previous administration's failure to successfully coordinate acquisition of PPE and medical supplies is a mistake that we should never repeat again. We owe it to veterans and staff at VA to get them the supplies they need when they need them. So I'm pleased that Mr. Parrish is here today to testify today to present his plan to fix the supply chain modernization effort. Now, the Inspector General's report last week highlighted that the Valor Program Manager during the deployment of DIMLs at the Level Federal Health Care Center in North Chicago, Illinois, did not follow VA's acquisition framework policies. So my question to you, Mr. Parrish, is where are the checks and balances in the acquisition system at VA? I have to assume this is exactly why we are continuing to have these discussions on failed modernization programs. Now, another concern of mine is that there seems to be a general attitude that VA should abdicate their contracting responsibilities and let the Department of Defense do their work for them. Now, I'm all for strategic sourcing and making the best use of contracts across the federal government, but I do not agree that the DoD is the answer to all of VA's contracting problems. Now, the reason the Veterans Affairs Committee exists and the reason why VA receives a separate appropriation is because veterans have requirements and needs that the Department of Defense does not address. So when we give away our ability to manage contracts and programs to another department, you lose the ability to ensure that the requirements of veterans and the VA are the top priority. Now, I look forward to hearing from all witnesses today and getting some answers on how to get this program and contracting at VA overall on track. Notice I didn't say back on track because I don't think it was ever on track. And I'm not just dinging the last administration. This has been a persistent issue of not ever having been on track. So my Republican colleagues, I don't want you to take my first opening comments about the last administration as like that was, the only administration that's had this issue. And I'm hopeful in a bipartisan way we are going to get things on track, maybe for the first time. So we can no longer be in a holding pattern of making the same blunder over and over again. And I'm pleased that we are in agreement with members of the minority on the committee that this is an important topic. And I look forward to continuing to work with them to resolve this issue once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano, for your comments. We will now turn to our witnesses, and I'll start by recognizing our first witness for 5 minutes. First, we have from the VA, Mr. Michael Parrish. Principal Executive Director for the Office of Acquisition, Logistics, and Construction. He is joined by Ms. Deborah Kramer, Acting Assistant Undersecretary for Health for Support, Veterans Health Administration, and Mr. Neil Evans, Acting Chief Information Officer. Mr. Parrish is going to provide the testimony for VA, and Mr. Parrish, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Takano, Chairman Pappas, Chairman Mervan, Ranking Member Mann, Ranking Member Rosendale, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. I appear before you today to share the current state of VA's enterprise supply chain modernization efforts and our strategies for improvement. Chairman Pappas mentioned I'm accompanied by Ms. Deb Kramer, Acting Assistant Undersecretary for Health for Support with the Veterans Health Administration, and Dr. Neil Evans, Acting Chief Information Officer for our department. To begin, I want to acknowledge our great and dedicated VA employees who, despite the challenges brought on by the global pandemic, continue to serve veterans with care and compassion. I also want to thank the House Veterans Affairs Committee for its support for our efforts to modernize VA supply chain. Supply chain issues are an evolving national concern and not unique to the VA. We are actively addressing these challenges and implementing near-term methods to ensure internal VA supply chain resiliency. VA is also working with the White House and other executive branch agencies to develop and implement actions identified in the National Strategy for a Resilient Public Health Supply Chain. In September, we began an enterprise-wide strategic analysis of its
Mr. Parrish, could you suspend for just a minute? I apologize. I think we're having some audio issues. Your volume is just a little bit lower than some of the other folks that we've heard from today. So I don't know if there's a way you can get closer to the mic or project a little bit more.
How's this?
That sounds a little bit better for me. So why don't you continue and I'll let you know if we have any other issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. So I'll just start. In September, we began an enterprise-wide supply chain analysis of our operations. I'm leading this effort in collaboration with the VA administrations and staff offices. The overarching enterprise objectives are threefold. One, to develop a comprehensive supply chain strategy with an integrated focus. Two, to develop an integrated program strategy, as well as a supply chain master schedule. And three, to establish appropriate metrics and measures of effectiveness to allow evidence-based management of VA supply chain. We've established the vision of what I call the Supply Chain 2050, and I've challenged the team to use what I say is EII requirements of easy-to-use, integrated, and intelligent systems, which are going to be applied to all future VA programs. Easy to use means the solution should be ready to implement out of the box without significant user training. Integrated means the solution is easily linked to and compatible with all other organizations or programs in the VA. And intelligent means the solution is data-driven, automated, and predictive. The initial phase of this strategic analysis includes a supply chain as-is assessment. We've assembled a strong team with the requisite expertise to lead this aspect and ensure proven strategic and programmatic methodologies are applied throughout our supply chain modernization and transformation efforts. This effort is driven from our teammates in the field, not from the headquarters. Additionally, we're including our industry partners as part of our overall process. With Secretary McDonough's leadership, VA has increased information sharing and promoted evidence-based decision-making. The department's chartered the Evidence-Based Policy Council, or EVPC, and the Investment Review Council, known as IRC, as well as an IT investment board co-chaired by me, the Chief Acquisition Officer, Dr. Neil Evans, the Chief Information Officer, and Mr. John Rachowski, our Chief Financial Officer, to ensure that the leaders of VA are provided with the information required to make sound recommendations on the way forward. As part of our improved governance structure, the department is completing operational management reviews, also known as OMRs, of all our major programs under the leadership of Deputy Secretary Renning. Additionally, I am personally leading and implementing quarterly program management reviews, known as PMRs, of all major acquisition programs to provide a forum for deliberate programmatic discussion of cost, schedule, performance, and risk of those various programs. These recurring structured reviews tie together to improve our VA governance structure, which directly impacts our VA supply chain transformation to ensure our efforts are aligned with departmental goals, priorities, and mission. As the committee is aware and has stated, VA's Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have assessed our VA supply chain and made recommendations for improvement. You'll hear from them today that while some progress has been made, we have much more work to do. And we agree with their assessment, and VA is committed to completing that work. Most recently, we received the report from the OIG with 3 recommendations. One, that we revisit its oversight and deployment of the DIMLS system. 2, develop a process to better identify and solve unmet high-priority business requirements and post-deployment challenges with DIMLS. And 3, properly staff our VA Logistics Redesign, or VALOR, Program Management Office to ensure we have the right expertise in place. As part of our governance structure I described earlier, we are reviewing all major acquisition programs to ensure the original theory of the case and conditions that establish those major programs are still current. DIMLS is undergoing that review now. VA is committed to transforming its supply chain to provide high-quality healthcare services and other benefits to increase our access and outcomes for veterans. This is important and personal to me as a service-disabled veteran, and I'm also a former service-disabled business owner. I am committed to delivering what we promise, deliver it on time, and deliver it on or under budget. We owe it to you, Congress, the American taxpayer, and more importantly, my fellow veterans. Your continued support is essential to fulfilling this mission. This concludes my statement. I and my colleagues are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parrish. Our next witness is Ms. Leanne Seawright. She's the Deputy Assistant Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Ms. Seawright, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Pappas, Chairman Morvan, Ranking Members Mann and Rosendale, and members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the OIG's recent report on VA's supply chain. Inspector General Missel testified before the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations in March 2021 regarding VA's supply chain, and those concerns still persist. OIG reports have identified challenges to real-time tracking of inventory, purchasing, distribution, storage, and other supply management functions. While VA staff created workarounds to meet patient needs, these sometimes lack compliance with VA policies and procedures. Further, even these well-meaning measures are not enough and can exacerbate underlying problems. My testimony focuses on VA's deployment of the DoD's Medical Logistics Standard Support, or DEMLS, at the level of Federal Health Care Center. We found significant unaddressed operational gaps that could affect the prompt delivery of healthcare services and deployments of DEMLS at future VA medical facility sites. We determined that DEMLS did not meet nearly half of all high priority needs at level. VA did not follow its own acquisition framework requirements, and the establishment of the VA Logistics Redesign Office, or VALOR, as the Program Oversight Office was flawed. First, while VA intended DEMLS to be a comprehensive, streamlined supply chain management system, it did not meet 40 of 90 high priority business requirements identified by the level staff. This forced staff to develop workarounds just to maintain day-to-day operations. Notably, DEMLS did not meet any of level's data and information sharing requirements, could not adequately perform routine healthcare technology management functions, and lacked key functions needed to maintain accountability of IT equipment. For example, DEMLS did not interface with VHA's corporate data warehouse. Second, although VA's acquisition framework policies outline a process to ensure DEMLS meets the facility's high priority requirements, VA did not follow the framework that was directed in the March 2019 memo, making DEMLS the enterprise solution. Moreover, DEMLS deployment cost for FY21 alone was $176 million, further requiring compliance with VA's acquisition framework policy. Third, the VALOR Program Office tasked with overseeing the effort also had a slow, unsteady start from lack of staffing and funding. Though created in early 2019 to manage the deployment, VALOR was not funded until January 2020. It has also been led by 6 different managers since 2019. From the outset, VALOR did not involve key national program offices and local staff in the assessment and development of functional requirements to help identify needed capabilities and prevent operational problems in areas such as data sharing and healthcare technology management. VALOR primarily focused on getting DEMLS procurement and logistics functions ready for deployment. The current executive director confirmed VALOR lacked the appropriate subject matter expertise to work with facility staff to determine and confirm operational requirement needs. The OIG made 3 recommendations to improve DEMLS system implementation across VHA. VA concurred with all reports, findings, and recommendations and submitted action plans for each. The OIG will monitor and assess the satisfactory completion of the proposed corrective actions and follow up. In conclusion, the work related to DEMLS discussed in this statement reveals there are still considerable challenges for VA to modernize its systems. The stakes are high for implementing a new supply chain system. Inefficient workarounds, including the continued use of VHA legacy systems, do not meet VA's intent to modernize. Without prompt and decisive action, the unresolved deficiencies identified at level will likely occur at subsequent sites, setting off a cascade of problems. Chairman Pappas, Morvan, this concludes my statement. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Seawright. We will now turn to our final witness, which is Ms. Shelby Oakley, a Director of Contracting and National Security Acquisitions for the Government Accountability Office. Ms. Oakley, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes.
Hi, Chairs Takano, Mervan, and Pappas, Ranking Members Mann and Rosendale, and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. VA struggles with supply chain management are well known to this committee and frankly to VA itself. Yet the department faces a number of fundamental challenges as it seeks to improve. As you know, we added VA acquisition management to GAO's high risk list in 2019, and I have testified before you several times in recent years about VA's various acquisition management struggles. For example, in 2017, I testified that VA's initial implementation of MSPV Next Generation was flawed. It lacked an overarching strategy, stable leadership, and workforce buy-in, resulting in a program that did not meet medical centers' needs. Since then, VA has struggled to chart a clear strategic direction for its medical supplies program. Last year, we recommended that VA take steps to assess the outcomes of its DLA MSPV pilot to develop a solid business case for making the decision as to whether to adopt the system VA-wide. However, VA didn't do this and instead decided to expand DLA's MSPV program across VA. The recent court ruling that halted this move exemplifies the consequence of VA's habit of putting action ahead of strategy. The pandemic also led VA to jump into action to address other supply chain issues. Several times over the last year, VA officials testified about their intent to accelerate demos by 2 years, citing VA's urgent need for a modern supply chain management system. Congress provided VA $100 million to accelerate demos, but VA has not spent this money and no longer expects to accelerate implementation. Based upon VA's multiple disparate efforts to modernize its supply chain, we recommended that VA develop a comprehensive supply chain management strategy. Mr. Parrish noted that his office is leading the effort to develop that strategy at the direction of the Deputy Secretary. VA leadership's action on this recommendation and in other areas shows commitment to improving the agency's supply chain management. However, VA faces a number of fundamental and cultural challenges that need to be addressed before it can make real progress in improving. For example, in an ongoing review, our preliminary observations indicate that many of VA's major programs are not following its current enterprise-wide acquisition framework. A good acquisition framework, among other things, provides leaders with the necessary information to make key decisions and ensure programs are underpinned by a sound business case. It also provides them with ways to monitor and ensure accountability for program outcomes, something that has been sorely lacking in VA. Senior VA acquisition officials recognize the need for more controls and accountability in decision-making and are working on a new acquisition framework that they plan to implement in 2022. While VA identified lessons learned about why the existing framework has not been broadly adopted, it remains to be seen how VA officials will contend with cultural issues, such as a lack of trust and poor communication that they report led to lackluster adoption. In conclusion, VA faces many challenges that require organizational transformation from both a cultural and business process perspective. More money will not solve VA's woes. Unless VA breaks its habit of putting action ahead of strategy, VA, Congress, and veterans will not see the outcomes they want and expect from billions of dollars in investments. The high-risk action plan VA developed is a good first step, but it remains incomplete and needs to evolve as the full breadth of root causes continue to surface. Further, VA's leadership and workforce must commit to and follow through on steps to institute lasting change. Addressing the fundamental challenges VA faces will be difficult, but if VA takes the time to do this right, they will be well positioned to more effectively use their resources to meet the needs, both daily and times of crisis, of those who have served our country. Chairs Takano, Mervan, and Pappas, ranking members Mann and Rosendale, and members of the committee, this concludes my oral statement. I'm happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oakley, for your testimony. We will now turn to the questions. Why don't we start by asking Mr. Parrish quickly to do a 5 count just to make sure we've gotten your sound in the right place.
Sure, let's see if we try the phone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any better?
Yeah, I think we hear that loud and clear. Thank you for doing that. Well, we'll go to questions now, and I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Parrish, we'll start with you. I want to get to this issue of the history that I highlighted in my testimony. We know VA has had a number of false starts and failures over the better part of the last 2 decades to modernize and improve its supply chain from the antiquated system into a more modern one. It's safe to say we all agree about the need for a modern, resilient, and efficient supply chain. We all want to get to that goal, but we're not there yet. So, Mr. Parrish, can you tell us what you believe are the key ingredients of success that you are pursuing? And, what have you learned from these failures as you come into this role and are beginning to plan for the future?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Pappas. Two points. One, we are focusing on acquisition reform per Ms. Oakley's commentary. We're working with OEI to kind of restructure and evaluate and establish a more rigorous oversight process, as well as a what we call the acquisition lifecycle framework that's going to be all-encompassing for the enterprise for future major acquisition programs. And we hope to roll that out in the next quarter or 2 at the latest. Specifically to the supply chain assessment, as you rightly mentioned, there have been multiple attempts over the years to have various evaluations. To my knowledge, this is the first enterprise-wide attempt. It's not just focused on VHA, but it's focused across the enterprise. So I think that's going to be a key indicator, because it's going to allow us to identify the interrelationships between the various programs and the various supply chains. 2 is we are making it driven by the field. So getting that cultural buy-in that Ms. Oakley also mentioned is it's field driven, and it's focused on establishing that as-is process initially. So we're taking all the lessons learned, as you mentioned, from the previous evaluations and assessments. So we're not starting from scratch, we're starting from where they left off, and we're going to build upon that as we go forward. But the next step after we do that is focusing on the requirements analysis, and then establishing a gap analysis between what we've got today and where we want to be, as I said, supply chain 2050 and 2050. And then we'll determine the technology solution. Technology should be the last decision in any process of a new product introduction that we're trying to establish.
So we've been asking for a comprehensive strategy, a roadmap for the department to pursue to get to this modern, efficient, resilient supply chain. Can you tell us a little bit more about when we expect to see that? Ms. Oakley alluded to the fact that this is something that you want to be compiling and providing, but we need to know that there are benchmarks. We need to know all about the components of this. We need to see timeframes. And so I'm going to ask again in this hearing, as I have in the last 2, are we going to see a comprehensive roadmap to know how we're going to get to where we need to be?
Yes, sir. I commit to having that comprehensive roadmap. Our timeline for the supply chain assessment is mid-December, in about a month, and we're well on track to achieve this, as we will have established that problem statement and that enterprise-wide as-is status of what we look like today. The next phase, as I mentioned, is requirements analysis and the strategy development, which will be in the second and third quarter of FY22, that we should have something to enterprise-wide for all of VA.
Okay, why don't we turn to Ms. C. Wright? I've got a question for you about DIMLs. We know that the pilot didn't meet nearly half of all the priority needs at this site in North Chicago. Your findings detail how staff at the Level Healthcare Center had to establish manual workarounds to track certain medical equipment, which increase the risk of equipment failures and other deficiencies. So can you talk about your thoughts on VA proceeding with DIMLs deployment across of all VA, given what we saw happen at the Level site?
Sure. So it's my understanding that the Valor office is trying to address those unmet requirements through updates of DEMLs. However, those updates, about 33 of them are still, we haven't seen any action on those in terms of what they're doing or any processes forward. So in terms of moving forward, I think until they come up with solutions for those high priority requirements, and then also really to speak to the change agent, getting the facility staff on board with the changes, because it's not just implementing a new system, it's implementing new processes and procedures as well, and gaining buy-in for those. So it's difficult to say whether those processes will really come through and satisfy the requirements moving forward, and whether DEMLs will be successful at future facilities.
Okay, doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. Maybe in the last few seconds, I don't know if VA could respond to Ms. Seawright's comments.
Yes, sir. I'll acknowledge her concerns. I would state that part of this entire assessment includes facilities and includes all of our comprehensive components.
Okay, we'll get into that a little bit deeper, but my time's up, and I'd like to turn things over to Ranking Member Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Mr. Parrish, it struck me, going through your testimony, that it's all about management frameworks, not the 3 programs I discussed in my opening remarks. VA's management process clearly need to be improved. I think we all agree with that, but I think, we have more immediate problems facing with DEMLs, regional readiness centers, and MSPB. I'd like to turn some attention to those. So really a question for Mr. Parrish and Ms. Kramer. Your responsibilities appear to be overlapping. Who's directly responsible and in charge of DEMLs?
The way we're structured, and thank you for that, Ranking Member Mann, the way we're structured as the CAO, I'm at the VA level, and each of the subcomponents have their own equivalent chief acquisition officers, or in Ms. Kramer's case, the Undersecretary for Support. And I'll let her talk more specifically on the programmatics aspect. One of my challenges is to be able to do an integration, to your point, of the 3 major digital transformations at the VA level to kind of make sure that we all work together and we're going forward.
So who's responsible for, who would be responsible for DEMLs?
So for the DEMLs program, I'm the program decision authority, and VHA has the Valor program is a program office in the Veterans Health Administration.
Okay. It seems like part of our problem here is just overlapping. I'm a farm kid, right? And in our farm, we used to say one of the best ways to starve a horse is making 2 people responsible for feeding it. And it seems like, this is a structural issue that could easily potentially get clarified. Ms. Kramer, VA committed to DEMLs in 2018 as a 1-site pilot, and then expanded it to a nationwide implementation in 2019. The first and only site so far was only completed last year in 2020. Is DEMLs still a proof of concept for the VA, or has it been successful enough in your mind and suitable to roll out everywhere?
Well, sir, the pilot at FHCC was set up as a joint incentive fund project. So that was done because FHCC is a one-of-a-kind organization, a joint Navy and VA organization. The desire there by the staff was to use the same systems, and that's what's being done there. That's separate from what we're trying to do in terms of finding an overarching solution for the larger requirements to support not just the medical supply chain, but all the support functions associated with that, including medical maintenance, maintenance of the environment and care, and those kind of things.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Seawright, the only data that seems to exist about DEML's performance is in North Chicago, and in your report about it was critical. Has DEML's been proven successful and ready for a nationwide rollout now in your mind?
Well, similar to my response to Chairman Pappas, I think it's still to be determined. There's a number of requirements that need to be solidified to find workarounds for that, and then to ensure that staff can do their jobs without having to use a swivel chair approach, using DEMLs and legacy systems at the same time. So we're not really moving forward. Even when you implement DEMLs, the efficiencies are not likely to be achieved as it stands today.
Okay. Follow up on that, Ms. Seawright. What are in your mind, the real life implication of DEMLs not being able to meet nearly half of the North Chicago facilities requirements, and what does that then portend for future sites?
Right. So like I was just saying, I think one of the biggest issues is the swivel chair approach. I have information in DIMLs, I have information in legacy systems, but they don't talk to each other. So I have to take information out of one system and put it into the other. And that creates additional work, additional time, and a lot of opportunities for errors in terms of moving information from point A to point B. So until you have that seamless transfer of information from within one system, whatever system that might be, I think there's a lot of risk that you're going to lose visibility of data, visibility of supplies, your ability to track, and really the intent behind DIMLs is to have a enterprise supply chain solution. And if they don't talk to each other, if it doesn't talk as a whole system, then you've negated that intent.
Yeah. Well, one more question for you again, Ms. Seawright. I understand that the VA OIG is not planning on any future work looking at DIMLs. Why is that?
Honestly, we don't have any plans for future work right now because we were waiting to see what the future of DIMLs was really going to be. With the litigation that occurred late this summer and the hold on the DLA MSPB contracts, that really affects, from our opinion, the ability of DIMLs to work effectively in any facility, because it's sort of the backbone of the ordering and the supply chain management processes. So until we have a better idea of what the future of that MSPB, whether it's DLA or prime vendor, and how that will work, we're holding to see what VA is going to do moving forward with DIMLs. We do have some projects in the works, but until we know that there's a future, we're not implementing any or starting any of those projects.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mann. I will now recognize Chairman Mervan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. As the chairman of Technology Modernization Subcommittee, my experience with VA's modernization efforts have largely focused on the Ehrm program. That program has suffered from lack of effective coordination between management and the contractor and VA staff. This has led to numerous complaints and a strategic pause ordered by Secretary McDonough this past summer. According to the report from the Office of Inspector General, it appears that the supply chain modernization program is suffering from similar issues. Ms. Oakley, the GAO has produced a number of reports before and during the pandemic on supply chain modernization issues. Do you see the issue of supply chain modernization as a representative of issues across the VA with their IT acquisitions? And I'm sorry, Ms. Oakley, you're still muted.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, all right. Absolutely, yes, the issues are very consistent, and they're indicative, like I said, of VA's bent of putting action ahead of strategy. When we added VA acquisition management to the high risk list, we pointed to similar challenges that plague many of VA's programs. Some of these include leadership instability, inadequate training. And now our ongoing work is, focusing on, do they even have a framework for conducting these programs, making sure that they're set off with a good business case that is then executed and monitored and measured for effectiveness. And without doing that, decisions are often ill-supported and no one's held accountable for outcomes.
Thank you. In your opinion, are the most important outstanding recommendations from the GAO that VA still needs to address to fix these issues?
Yeah, so we made the recommendation about VA needing to do a comprehensive supply chain management strategy, and are really encouraged that Mr. Parrish and his folks are undertaking that. And then we also have another recommendation focused on a medical surgical program strategy. Those are outlined in our priority recommendation letters to VA that we issue every year. But I want to make sure I'm very clear. It's not going to be sufficient for VA to just address our recommendations. It needs to continue its work to understand fully what the root causes are of its challenges, and then put in place that credible plan to address. And again, like I said, lack of a framework. We're also finding in ongoing work that VA really lacks information about who is even in its acquisition workforce to be able to make sure that they're trained and capable to be able to execute these big programs. So stay tuned for some likely recommendations in those two areas going forward.
Based on the work that you have already completed and the work that you are currently performing to oversee issues with the VA's IT programs, do you think the current plan to adopt the DIML system is the most appropriate path forward?
I think as Ms. Seawright alluded to, some of the key factors that influence VA's decisions to adopt DIMLs are now in question, in particular, whether it can actually use DLA's MSPB program or not. And that was one of the driving factors for going down the DIMLs path. And as was mentioned, VA's own AOA documentation didn't even point to DIMLs as the best solution, but but nevertheless, that was the path taken. And I think it's really important. VA has an opportunity through this supply chain assessment that Mr. Parrish is leading up to, is to step back and examine whether DIMLs remains its preferred solution. Is the business case there to support that DIMLs can meet the requirements of each of these facilities? Going through a framework and going through a process for acquisition oversight, that's one of the key aspects is, does the material solution meet the requirements that are existing? And clearly through the IG's work on DIMLs, it was not the case.
Thank you, Ms. Oakley. Mr. Parrish, as the Chief Acquisition Officer, you have the insight into the current state of all the modernization efforts currently underway at VA. I'm sure you can appreciate the concern that we have with the current state of supply modernization given the recent court decision and report from the OIG. Do you feel that pausing any further implementations of DIMLs is appropriate given the way things are going?
Thank you for that question, Chairman Mervan. And yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking, as I mentioned earlier, taking our governance structure and we're evaluating DIMLs to ensure, as Ms. Oakley rightly said, that the original conditions and the original theory of the case of DIMLs is still valid.
With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mervan. I will now recognize Ranking Member Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Appreciate it. I want to dig into the study alternatives that VA used to justify selecting DIMLs in 2018. Dr. Evans, it was written by the Office of Information Technology, and Ms. Kramer, you were listed in it as a subject matter expert. So I would like to ask both of you, how was it decided to only compare the DIMLs to IBM Maximo software and not any of the other software programs in the marketplace?
Well, Ranking Member Rosendale, good morning. I was interviewed as an expert. I can't answer to why MITRE chose to do what they did. I was not involved in the design of that study, but interviewed as a subject matter expert.
Okay. Ms. Kramer, Dr. Evans, if the VA's criteria was one system that performs a whole range of functions, but Maximo only performs one function, what was the point of basing the study on it? How is it anything but a flawed comparison?
Ranking Member Rosendale, I think that's one of the key points that actually Mr. Parrish was bringing up, is that the current strategic review and assessment and functional gap analysis that we're doing is intended to ask these questions in a comprehensive way, to determine the strategy to move forward before we determine the technology that meets the strategy.
So we're going to, just so I understand the process, we've already invested in a software program that was compared to another software program that didn't offer any of the same options and components. And now that we've invested that money, we're going to go back and see why we did it that way and where the money is going. Now that we've already screwed the process up. Is that what you're telling me?
Sir, I think what we're doing is using what we're learning from the FHCC implementation and through the review that's being conducted by the Deputy Secretary to assess whether this is the right decision. We've learned a lot with the FHCC implementation. Those things need to be taken into consideration as we look at our path forward.
Okay, so Ms. Kramer, is no one who is part of this contracting process aware that possibly it would be better to compare similar products if we're going to be investing billions of dollars, to compare similar products instead of taking a product that is completely void of all of the components of the one and the criteria that has been established that was being searched for?
Ranking Member Rosendale, I believe the MITRE study was flawed. It looked at two options that were actually used to support manufacturing, not healthcare. The healthcare option that it looked at only supported supply chain and not the other functions that we require. And it eliminated using DIMLs and logical based on the justification that because it didn't do what we do in VA today, it wasn't a valid solution. I think that all of those assumptions need to be relooked.
Okay, so turning to the MITRE analysis, and I just happen to have a copy of it here, and the alternatives, the Infor software scored 1,836 points compared to DIML's 877 points. So MITRE estimated the cost for Infor at $1.2 billion and DIML's at nearly $1.7 billion. Please explain to me how anyone could have selected DIMLs based on this information.
Sir, I was not there when that decision was made, but I'm assuming that they did it because they were looking at a system that did more than just the supply chain aspects. Medical maintenance is critical as well, as is taking care of the environment of care.
Which study did the VA rely on to make this decision, the OIT study or the MITRE study?
I don't think there was a formal study that was published like the MITRE study. I think that was done based on business case analysis by subject matter experts. But we can go back, sir, take that one for the record and go back and see what we can find to provide to you.
I would. And who made the decision to actually recommend DIMLs to the secretary back in 2018 as well? Do we have that answer?
We'll get that for you, sir.
Okay, greatly appreciated. Ms. Seawright, how was it decided that DIMLs meets VA's requirements before it was deployed to North Chicago or anyone else, anywhere else in VA?
I honestly don't know how it was decided that it would meet those requirements. They developed they developed a requirements document and assessed those requirements, and how they made the decision that those requirements would meet the needs. I can't speak to that.
Mr. Chair, I do see that my time has expired.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosendale. I'll now recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Mr. Rosendale, Ranking Member Rosendale, I was in communication with the administration at the time. I'm almost believing that DIMLs, which is a Defense Department related contractor or program, that was coming from the secretary and his background at DoD. But I'm trying to verify that information. But that's my recollection. But I just want to kind of pass it along to you. I'd like to start with a simple question. Have we seen real world progress on during the past 8 years to work to modernize the supply chain? The chronology of the past and unsuccessful attempts to modernize the VA supply chain in Chairman Pappas's opening statement should give us all pause. I recognize the very large challenge of designing and then implementing a system that will handle the purchasing and inventorying of billions of dollars of medical and other supplies needed by the department. However, as all the witnesses have made clear, this current system is simply not good enough. As I've said 8 years before, I've said 8 years for a specific reason. These ongoing serious supply problems and failed solutions are not about any one administration, nor about a political party. I see this as a problem enduring through the last administration and the previous ones before that, and so on. As a committee, we must also approach this in a bipartisan manner, helping VA to modernize the supply chain. For the VA witnesses, what progress in modernizing the supply chain can you point to in the past 8 years? Any one of the VA witnesses?
Okay. Chairman Takano, thank you for that question. Obviously, it was before my time, but I would assess, and I'll just make a general comment. One of the earlier testimonies, Congressman Bergman highlighted that our challenge is operating a analog bureaucracy in a digital world, and so we're doing these 3 major digital transformations, supply chain being one of them, the logistics reform that we're moving forward on. I know that in my 8 months here, we are making some progress on slowly implementing those governance structures to be able to kind of make sure that we're moving faster. So in other words, taking a step back to go faster. I don't know if Ms. Kramer or Dr. Evans want to add to that at all.
We have made improvements. For instance, we did implement a graphical user interface with Vista for the use of the prosthetics contracts to make it easier for users to find the products they need. And we also created a national equipment catalog containing more than 500 contracts in 175 different categories that, again, made it much easier for users to find what they were looking for. What Mr. Parrish said in terms of being an analog environment, that is what VA is. We do not have a supply chain management system today. So trying to make it easier for our users to find what they need is one of the most important things we need to do.
Okay, that word analog, it is an analog environment. That to me means not digitized, not automated. So we're in this situation in 2021 with an analog system. What I'm basically getting at is whether or not the actual frontline users of the system, those who sit before screens and order supplies, and those who stock the shelves, have they seen any progress? If we're still in an analog environment, is that what you're telling me?
Well, sir, they've seen it with the graphical user interface with the prosthetics systems. So there's a definite place where they've seen an improvement and made it easier. And the National Equipment Catalog, while it's not 21st century, is a significant improvement over someone having to search through various SharePoint sites and be able to find what they need. So we have seen some improvements, yes.
Well, Ms. Oakley, given the extensive work that GAO has done on this topic, can you point to any progress that VA has made to benefit VA employees that are handling the supply chain?
If I said it's not quite as bad as it was when we first started doing that work, that might indicate a little bit of progress. But I think, frankly, the constant churn and change and being whipped left to right by the VA logistics and contracting staff has just made it too hard on them, made their jobs too hard. And I think that that's the key that you're looking for is, can these folks do their jobs in the most efficient and effective way? And have we seen progress that has enabled that? And I would say not to date.
So no is the answer. And when you say it's not quite as bad, that tells me it's still bad, right? Okay.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano. I see General Bergman's on the Zoom, so I'd like to recognize him for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everyone, colleagues, and also those who've given testimony before us. The limiting factor in most of our performances on a daily basis, and I talk to you as people, is we still are analog. And that's okay. When they transition this to digital, I think I'm probably going to seek other things to do. So having said that, Ms. Kramer, your cost estimate to implement DIMLs is between 1.6 billion and 1.9 billion, depending on how long it takes to implement. The life cycle cost estimate through 2033 is 2.8 billion. The Department of Defense owns this system. Why is it so expensive for the VA to adopt it? We talking R&D costs here for something that is already working. How's the math add up? And the math is still all analog.
Yes, sir, the math is analog. those costs also include the cost to make the changes required. There are things that we do differently here in VA and that DIMLS needs to accommodate. So for instance, one of the shortcomings at FHCC was the inability for users to be able to see their data inside VA's corporate data warehouse. We implemented that change request. That will be completed in December. And then the FHCC folks will actually be able to go to the CDW, the corporate data warehouse, and see the data in the environment they're used to seeing. So there are many things there that need to do it. I would say, though, that the existing life cycle cost estimate is inaccurate. It actually assumed that we would have fielded to a number of different locations over the last 20 months, and COVID has prevented that. And we are going to be, depending upon the outcome of the assessment that the Deputy Secretary is conducting, will initiate a new life cycle cost estimate to validate those costs.
Okay, well, I would suggest that that's helpful because, our role as legislators is to provide funds. Your job is to implement those funds and then provide feedback to us. So to see if we need more funds or if we can, if you will, repurpose, redistribute, reuse excess funds. The government is inherently not good at that. I mean, not good or bad, just, well, it is bad actually, but it is, it is what it is. So it would be helpful, I think, for us as the committee to get an update from you on that, if you will, modified or new estimate, of the life cycle cost so that we as the whole staff can figure out how to deal with it. And give it, sometimes the story is going to be the good news or bad news. It is what it is, but we have to deal with it. Ms. Seawright, if the VA is unable to use the Department of Defense medical surgical prime vendor contracts, is DIMLS system still necessary?
I can't speak to whether DIMLS itself is still necessary, but VA is in desperate need of a supply chain management system. So whatever that solution may be is what VA needs to support that.
Okay, Ms. Oakley, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is DIMLS is optimized to work with DLA's MSPV system. And that's part of the reason why they moved forward with it. And in my discussion earlier, looking at VA needs to take a wider look to see if that is in question, if use of DLA MSPV is in question, does the business case that was kind of faulty to begin with even still make any sense for continuing to pursue DIMLS, or should they look to those other options? And frankly, in conducting an analysis of alternatives, that's what it's called, right? When you go and you look at all your alternatives that are available to be able to meet your requirements, assessing systems that are credible and can meet those needs and across a range of systems is one of the best practices. And I think VA needs to keep that best practice in as they're reevaluating and reassessing the system that they're going to put in place to meet that modern supply chain management system requirement.
Thank you. And I see I only have a few seconds left. I'll just say, number one, thanks to all of you who work every day to take technology and appropriately use it so our business processes reflect our needs and the needs of the veterans in the VA. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, General Bergman. And I don't see other members who haven't asked questions. So we'll move into a second round. I assume others may have some additional questions. I've got a few. I want to pick up on that issue that General Bergman was just raising about a wider look at other systems. And so, Mr. Parrish, maybe I could ask you this question. You've been asked many times about DIMLS and about its fate and what the department is pursuing, but I think we need a little bit additional clarity here, just about whether you're completely committed to pursuing DIMLS, despite the fact that the assessment and comprehensive strategy aren't complete yet. Is that an accurate characterization that you're committed to DIMLS and you're moving forward with it?
Chairman Pappas, thank you for that question. And I will go back to stating that we are conducting this review, doing this governance with the governance structure that we put in place, and we will have a due out to you once we have that finished.
So is DIMLS just on hold or on the back burner, or are you moving forward with it? Even though, all this other information the picture isn't complete on it.
I would say we are assessing the future of where we're going to go with that program.
Okay, so it's up in the air. You're not committed to it.
I'm not going to say we're not committed to it because that is, what right now our primary effort. However, we are reevaluating the theory of the case to make sure that it is still valid for us to continue forward. In a bigger look, as Ms.
Can you talk about how about other, Ms. Oakley just referred to taking a wider look at other opportunities that are out there, other systems that might meet the needs. So are you pursuing any other options? Are there, for instance, any off-the-shelf systems used by the private sector that might be available?
Well, sir, as I stated earlier, the actual technology solution should be the last decision made. The first step should be the business case and validate that business case is still valid, and then assess where your requirements are for both the future and what you are actually executing today. So the gap analysis. So all the hard work in a new product should be done up front before you decide on a technological path forward. So again, we're take that for action to get back with you on that one.
Is one of the things that you are considering as part of this, look before you arrive at the technology solution? Are you thinking about the fact that DoD plans to upgrade DIMLS to logical by 2023? Is that something you take into consideration now, or do you think about that later?
Well, sort of logical has been delayed to 2025. And I guess I'll go back to what Chairman Takano said early on is the mission of the Department of Defense is to fight and win our wars. Our mission in the VA is to care for those warriors and their widows and orphans upon completion of their military duties. So as Ms. Kramer said, that our medical focus, we are focused on the medical aspect, where on the DoD side, medical is a combat support function. So we have different requirements, we have different work streams, different processes. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our requirements are properly established and validated before we decide on any specific technology.
So let me ask you about Warstopper. Ranking Member Mann brought up the program. Warstopper would help ensure that critical supplies could be acquired during a national emergency, such as a future pandemic like the one we just lived through and are continuing to live through. So VA's paused efforts as it's been working on a multi-agency assessment of the public health supply chain as directed by the president. So I'm wondering now that a national strategy has been put out, if Warstopper is going to fit into VA's emergency readiness plans.
Thank you for that question, Chairman Pappas. Let me pass that off to Ms. Kramer, who can better answer that.
Good morning, Chairman Pappas. The implementation plans for the 20 or 30 actions included in the National Strategy for Resilient Public Health Supply Chain are in process now. All of them will be completed by next summer. Implementation will begin as each is completed. We are still working with our interagency partners to determine how the DLA warfighter does or does not fit into that strategy. And then we would ask that if you do provide legislation coming forward, that it include the flexibility to allow us to support whatever the future national strategy may be.
Okay, you mentioned next summer. What should we expect by next summer?
Well, sir, what they're doing right now, there are 30 actions in play right now required by the national strategy. Those are being worked in 4 different phases. Phase 2 is underway now. So development of program objectives and metrics, and then the implementation plans themselves. There's quite a few. We'd be happy to provide a more detailed briefing on that at a separate time.
Yeah, I think we'd be interested in that. And just while I have you, Ms. Kramer, in the last few seconds I've got, can you speak to just the state of PPE today, how VA is doing, and what preparations you might be making for the winter months as we know the case count and hospitalizations continue to rise in certain parts of the country?
Yes, sir. I'm actually very happy to say that we have a minimum of 180 days of supply on hand for all critical PPE. That is what the regional readiness centers bring us, the ability to hold 120 days there and an additional 60 days at the facilities. We are well prepared should there be another surge.
Okay, thanks for that. And with that, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Mann if he has additional questions.
I do. Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Really want to talk a little bit about these regional readiness centers. again, Mr. Parrish, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania is the largest, most active regional readiness center, 863,000 square feet. Our understanding is it stores about 25,000 pallets of supplies right now, which only fills about 10% of that warehouse. Couldn't the VA be achieving its goals with much less space?
Well, thank you for that question, Congressman Mann. And as you know, your staffers had come and we did a site visit, I believe it was last week, with our VHA team. And I'll pass that answer back off to Ms. Kramer as well.
Yes, good morning, Ranking Member Mann. We originally designed that warehouse to support a much larger demand based on where we saw the pandemic going. So originally we were looking at 65,000 K. It's dynamic, and we are looking, that site is going to close, and we're going to be transitioning that material into Defense Distribution Depot, Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, and Tracy, California.
Okay, I mean, I understand we spent $180 million to occupy that warehouse through 2023. If 90% of the floor space is not occupied, that means, you know, we'll spend $162 million unnecessarily. Couldn't that $162 million have been spent much better elsewhere on patient care, medical supplies? I mean, this just seemed like an enormous amount of money that we spent for space that we're not even using.
Well, sir, again, I would have to say that that contract or IAA took a while to get in place, and it was based on the demands at the time. We are adjusting that now to close that facility so that we do avoid spending money there that does not need to be spent.
Okay. My understanding that Mr. Parrish or Ms. Kramer, whichever, almost 20 those 25,000 pallets that are in Chambersburg, almost all of it is for personal protective equipment. VA has been moving that inventory from warehouse to warehouse, and the medical centers are placing very few orders for it today. Why is that happening, and what are we doing with the inventory if it's still collecting dust? What are we going to do, you know, when these contracts expire here in the next few years?
Well, Mike, I can take that one. We actually are taking, we do have orders. When the primary source of supply for PPE should continue to be our medical surgical prime vendors. If you don't use those fully, they lower down what you can get. You go on allocation and can't get your material. So that's still the primary source. When they cannot meet a requirement, that's what the regional readiness centers do. They allow us to build resiliency into our internal supply chain. As you know, supply, distribution, manufacturing globally it's still disruptive. It is still not dependable. And so we do need to keep this material. We are, though, filling orders on a regular basis every month to meet the demand. We've also moved in and are accommodating other shortages. As you probably are aware, there's a global shortage of blood tubes today. And so we're actually also storing blood tubes at the regional readiness centers and then providing that to the facilities when their prime vendors can't meet the demand for the patients they're seeing.
Okay. Back on similar to what Chairman Pepis was talking about with the War Stopper program, you know, in my mind, personal protective equipment, you know, gloves, N95 masks, gallons, these are exactly the types of items the War Stopper program handles best. Do you agree that participating in the War Stopper program alongside the regional readiness centers would decrease the risk of shortages and spoilage?
Actually, sir, we want a strategy that would allow us to use things like vendor managed inventory, whether that's through the Warfighter program, through the interagency effort that we're working at with the National Strategy for Resilient Public Health Chain, or something that we do on our own with one of the manufacturers. Yes, anything that's got an expiration date needs to be something that is turning over at a relatively rapid rate, but we still need the ability to reach out and surge as is required to support this pandemic or any future public health emergency.
Okay. You know, we've had, you know, multiple witnesses, including the Secretary, have testified that VA would benefit from participating in War Stopper, and the Department is supportive of our legislation that we've offered up with some changes. Yet when I've requested information, most importantly, the list of items VA wants to access in the program, there's been no response or frankly, any cooperation at all. Do you commit to provide the list immediately and cooperate with the committee as we really look at War Stopper as a legitimate option to help the VA and to help our veterans?
Ranking Member Mann, you have my promise on that. We'll do that immediately following the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I have no further questions. Chairman Pappas.
Thank you very much. Chairman Mervan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Pappas, Mr. Parrish, we've been made aware of the DIML's is not only the supply chain tool currently deployed at VA. Will your strategy identify all of the tools that VA is currently using for supply chain management?
Thank you, Chairman Mervan, for that question. Absolutely, yes. Part of our as-is assessment is to identify what we are using today, and it includes comprehensively, back to Ms. Oakley's point about our acquisition workforces, all our logistical people and where they're located. So we hope to have that initial portion of the assessment done here in about a month. We've got site visits ongoing, we've got interviews ongoing, comprehensively across the enterprise for all components of the supply chain, through all the administrations, through NCA, VBA, as well as VHA, and also our facilities offices.
But specifically, do you know what other systems you guys are using?
Well, I do know that we have Maximo in place in a couple other facilities.
Any other ones?
I don't have specific names, Ms. Kramer, if you want to.
Yes, sir. It's actually a very complex environment. Let me give you an example. GIP, which is the inventory system that VA uses today, which, by the way, does not even take an expiration date. It is that old, and it wasn't designed to support medical. It's not just one. Every hospital has their own instance of that. So 170 islands of excellence with data that doesn't agree. INTER and IFR are systems that we have to communicate with. We use Maximo and AIMS MERS. We've actually laid all of those systems out as a part of our DIMLS implementation, because we need to understand where the data is coming from to support a DIMLS implementation. We can provide that to the committee, sir.
Yes, please, if you would. After your strategy document is completed, can we expect to see full and open competition for a comprehensive supply chain solution at VA?
Chairman Mervan, once we decide on the path forward, and if we choose to go through a source selection, I will commit to that. Yes, sir.
As you're sure you can appreciate, given the issues that VA has had with these programs, I'm personally interested in seeing VA start and openly compete these IT programs and follow the acquisitions framework policy. I look forward to working with you this Congress to help reinforce VA's acquisition process and to start making progress instead of restating these programs every few years. I also want to ask Mr. Parrish, given the number of attempts the VA has made to modernize the supply chain management system, and as identified by Chairman Pappas in his opening, I don't think I'm alone in worrying that any new efforts has the potential to be another failed attempt. That being said, if the VA identifies that the move to DLA and DIMLS is not the best path forward, they should pause the current effort and find a new solution. In your testimony, Mr. Parrish, you highlighted that there are a number of efforts underway to ensure evidence-based decision-making with programs and acquisitions. I think that's a step in the right direction, and I fully support VA taking a look at all of their IT programs to ensure that we aren't spending money on programs that don't meet the needs of VA staff. For the supply chain program in particular, what do you see as the biggest factors that need to be reviewed before moving ahead with a solution?
Chairman Mervan, let me take that for record and respond back to you once we've completed our initial assessment.
Will you be taking into account previous evaluations of potential solutions like the analysis of the alternative produced by MITRE?
Yes, that was one of the components that we are all reviewing. We're reviewing all the previous assessments, as I had mentioned, and we're not starting from scratch. So we're taking all those items and taking them into consideration. We've created a master database that the team, again, it's the field-driven team, not headquarters, along with our industry partners are using for reference and leverage. So we've, in the spirit of transparency and jointness across the entire enterprise, all of our organizations see everything that we have done previously and where we're going forward. So we communicate and collaborate very well.
Okay, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Mervan. I don't know if Ranking Member Rosendale is still on, but if he'd like to ask additional questions, I can recognize him. Okay, well, we'll come back to you, Ranking Member Rosendale, if you pop back on. With that, maybe General Bergman has additional questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Parrish, how much has the VA spent so far in shipping items to the Chambersburg warehouse? Sea, air, land, Pony Express, mail, whatever.
Or I'll take that as for the record, and I'll get back to you on the proper answer.
Okay, as long as you're taking it for the record, how much has the VA spent on all categories of shipping of items from all the other warehouses? So let's look at a total picture piece, not just Chambersburg. That would be helpful.
Yes, sir. I'll take all that for action. We'll commit to that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Parrish, on another note, the warehouses are using a DoD system called the Defense Property Accountability System, or DPAS, to manage their inventory. Why is it not sufficient? And why does the VA need to implement DIMLs in addition? Do we need to overlap? Do we need duplication, or is one good enough?
Well, sir, as I stated, we're undergoing this comprehensive review. I don't know that one's sufficient or one's not sufficient, but I'll also take that for action to respond back to you once we're done with this assessment to properly identify the requirements and then determine which technology fits into where we need to be.
Do you have a time frame for getting that info?
Yes, sir. The initial assessment is our as-is status is due to me in a month, that we report back to the Deputy Secretary, and we've committed to that. And then the gap analysis is completed in the next 2 quarters. So by spring, summertime, we'll have answers to all of your questions, sir.
Is there any hint anywhere that when all the data is compiled and the assessment is complete, that decision might be made to, well, we'll still use 2 systems anyway?
So I trust the process, being a Philadelphian, so we're going to rely on the facts and we're not going to presuppose any solutions.
Okay, well, thank you. That's all I have. I yield back.
Sure.
Thank you, General Bergman. Chairman Takano, you're recognized for additional questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. So, Mr. Parrish, I get the sense that VA is going to reevaluate, possibly reconsider the plan to move to DIMLs as the modernization solution. That's the feeling I'm getting. Is my feeling correct?
Well, sir, as I stated, part of our structure that we're doing, and this is for all major programs, we did this with the HR and others, that we're reviewing the program to assess that if the original conditions and environment and the business case back when it was decided are still valid today. And then we'll make that decision after we evaluate that. All right.
How is that different than just reevaluate? So are you reevaluating the plan to move to DIMLs? Is that what's going on?
Yes, sir. That is, we're assessing the program overall and determining the best course of action. Okay. Well,
I find that the Court of Federal Claims opinion to be fairly convincing that VA is not prepared to move forward with the proposed move to DLA. And I want to reinforce that failure to modernize is not an option, and that this is a priority. Modernization is a priority of mine. And I want to make sure that we don't continue with an antiquated system that doesn't provide VA insight into the supply needs across the country. I just want to make sure that that's clear. I'm happy to see that in your testimony, Mr. Parrish, that you are working to put some structure and planning in place at VA to ensure that we are doing acquisitions correctly. As part of your testimony, we were provided the VA supply chain transformation roadmap phases, which include milestones where findings and updates are provided to the VA Operations Board. Can you tell me, Mr. Parrish, who sits on the VA Operations Board and how often the board is convened?
Yes, sir, and that's part of our new governance structure. And that VA Operations Board reports to the VA Executive Board. At the Executive Board level, that's chaired by Secretary McDonough, and it's the entire leadership sits on that board. On the VA Operations Board, it's chaired by Deputy Secretary Remy, and we all, as at the deputy level and as the functional champion level, CAO, CIO, and CFO, all sit on that board as well on the VAOB.
All right, well, thank you. Your roadmap also includes a decision event for the Secretary of the VA at the end of May 2022, before the new integrated supply chain strategy is implemented. I realize that decisions on the supply chain program won't routinely be elevated to the Secretary for final approval. So I'm interested to hear how you plan to oversee and manage this program going forward after a strategy is in place.
Well, sir, my role is the Chief Acquisition Officer. I have the obligation and the authorities to report to the Secretary all actions, especially around our major acquisition programs. And we've established our major acquisition programs to be defined as follows. Anything that is more than $200 million in costs per year, over $1 billion in life cycle costs, or anything that has been designated by leadership as a major acquisition. And that's our focus on that.
Well, I've heard that there are, I've heard that a number of boards and councils at VA surrounding acquisitions and programs recently, but I've heard of them. But what I am most interested in is who makes up the final decision authority on large acquisitions.
Yes, sir. The ultimate decision will be, and we're establishing a new major acquisition, if you will, program framework from cradle to grave. So a new idea comes in place, and I'm working on that with our OAI team, our new Assistant Secretary Kiyokawa, and I, along with the rest of our team. We're going to hopefully have a new process in place, so we'll take that and I will have to report back to you once we have that completed.
All right, not real clear about who that, on the big acquisitions, who's that final decision authority? Who is that?
Yes, ultimately it's the Secretary, but we're putting a process in place along with our governance structure to have it properly vetted before even it raises to any new program, before it even raises to the level of the Secretary. All
right, the buck stops at the Secretary, but you're going to give me some better idea about how that recommendation is going to be
yes,
formed.
sir. Yeah.
All right. Well, what is the current status or makeup of the group of decision makers at VA that will routinely approve and review acquisition decisions for these large programs?
Well, we have these monthly meetings that we have what's called the Investment Review Council, and we also have the IT Investment Board, and those are co-chaired by myself, by Dr. Evans, the acting CIO, as well as Assistant Secretary Rashowski, our CFO. So the CIO, CFO, and CAO, we work hand in glove, talk almost daily about major programs, but we meet formally monthly to review the programs. And as I mentioned in my oral testimony, the way we have added some of the governance structure around those OMRs, those operating management reviews at the deputy secretary level, he gets a chance to review them strategically. And then I drill down on the programmatics, the cost, schedule, performance, and risk. And I'm in there quarterly with all these major programs, and the CIO and the CFO also sit in those meetings with me.
All right. Well, thank you. I yield back. I'm sorry for going over my time, Mr. Chairman.
No problem, Chairman Takano. I do have a couple additional ones, and maybe folks have some other questions for a third round. We can do that if folks are interested. But Ms. Oakley, could I turn to you real quick? Because I think this issue of having a comprehensive strategy is so crucial to the ultimate success of VA here. I know you've alluded to the recommendation that's come from GAO to develop this supply chain management strategy, which would help coordinate and improve VA's efforts. So can you just talk a little bit more about what VA's comprehensive plan should entail? I don't want to leave this hearing without that really being underscored.
Yeah, the comprehensive supply chain management strategy should really clearly define all the elements of VA supply chain and address the interrelationships between the various modernization programs. It needs to outline, the next steps. It needs to assign and document clear lines of responsibility, put in place metrics and measures to assess performance, and outline how the VA's various different efforts are integrated. I think it's really important to note that if this strategy is done well, it will outlast leadership, right? Like putting it in place and implementing it will outlast leadership changes. And I think that's the important point, right? If we keep changing the approach and changing what we're doing every time new leaders come into VA, we're never going to make any progress. And so a well-documented, comprehensive supply chain strategy will hopefully outlast, changes in leadership.
Thanks for your comments. I really appreciate that. And Mr. Parrish, maybe I could just turn to you for one as well. We've heard about how interoperability is so crucial. We know FMBT, EHRM. We've got to make sure that they're connected and reliant on each other. And one linkage that's been highlighted is DIMLS and EHRM, which are connected through VA's joint architecture. So could you talk or have the other VA witnesses talk about what other modernization or supply chain programs are linked and how that impacts your decisions moving forward?
Chairman Pappas, you highlighted the top three, EHRM and FMBT and the Valor program. What I would take for action, and I promise to get back to you once we have our assessment done, because one of the key items we're doing in the assessment is to identify those interrelationships and see where everybody are linked. I do know at the tactical level, the teams are talking to each other and they're working closely to kind of schedule and deconflict any type of items that are going. I don't know, Dr. Evans, if you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So there are interdependencies between all three. That is EHR modernization, the electronic health record modernization product needs to have input with regard to the supplies that can be ordered as part of a physician ordering something. So there is a connection between whatever VA's comprehensive supply chain management solution will need to interface with the electronic health record modernization system. There's currently a manual, it's not a manual, but there's currently an approach that has allowed us to go live with the electronic health record in Spokane with essentially files that get the data to the electronic health record. But we will need to have a part of the assessment of the requirements that Mr. Parrish is mentioning is understanding and assuring that the solution that we deliver will interface. DIMLS does interface. It's what the Department of Defense is using with their interface to interface the supply chain capabilities with EHR. There's also, of course, an intersection with FMBT, with the financial management system, because with supply chains, there is an ordering and financial piece to that.
Okay, thanks for walking us through that. I appreciate it. I have no further questions. Ranking Member Mann, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you, Chairman Pappas. Just a few more questions, specifically to the medical surgical prime vendor contracts. Mr. Parrish, I'm not an attorney, but the Court of Federal Claims judge was clear. I mentioned this in my opening remarks that what VA has been trying to do with MSPV contracts was uncompetitive and constituted a breach of contract. Do I understand correctly that you and Ms. Kramer have decided to continue this effort to rely on the DoD's contracts?
No, sir. From that court case, we've taken 3 actions. One is obviously we've had to take a step back and revert to our bridge contract. And Vision 6 was the only one that had moved forward to the DLA contract. And because of the court case, they're transitioning back to the original bridge contract. So they're stepping away from the DLA relationship. That transfer back should be done in early January. Vision 20, which is up in the Northwest, that they are working with DLA, and that because in the court case they've allowed that to continue. And then additionally, we're creating a new bridge contract, a 1-year contract that'll take us through next December 22, by which time we should be able to have a better assessment and idea of which way we're going to go forward, as well as any potential source solicitation that was mentioned earlier.
So this new approach, you believe, we're doing a similar thing, but that it's going to be legal this time? Is that?
Absolutely.
The approach?
I guess I failed to mention that OGC, our general counsel, is deeply embedded in all the conversations we have, along with our great contracting teammates and members that we have them embedded into the programs. So it's no longer siloed. We're all as one collaborative entity, joint.
Okay. And then thank you. And then my last question is for Ms. Oakley. Switching gears a little bit. This morning we talked about DIMLs, regional readiness centers, MSPVs. I see major inconsistencies in how these programs have been planned, initiated, as well as how they're being managed now. How do you, big picture, evaluate VA's processes to manage these major programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Our ongoing work is showing that, VA's major acquisitions, several of the ones that we're talking about, are not guided by a credible acquisition framework currently. And, I applaud Mr. Parrish and his efforts to try and bring more discipline to that. But what it has resulted in has been, differing approaches for each program, lack of clear direction, limited ability to assess progress and hold folks accountable. You might say that it could leave the impression that VA is managing these $1 billion of investments in somewhat of a loosey-goosey fashion. And I'm hoping that Mr. Parrish's efforts bring more discipline and accountability to VA's management of its major acquisition programs.
Great. Well, thank you. I have no further questions, Chairman Pappas.
Thank you very much. Chairman Mervan, you're recognized for additional questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. Ms. Oakley, from the work that the GAO has completed to date, do you have a better insight into who exactly is providing oversight and management to the modernization programs?
I wish I could say I did. I think one of the consequences of not having a credible acquisition framework in place is that the lines of accountability and responsibility are as clear as mud. For example, Mr. Parrish discussing that, there's 3 co-chairs to some of these committees that they sit on. It doesn't really give you that belly button to press as to who's held responsible and accountable. If everybody's responsible, nobody is. And what we really want to see in, a credible acquisition framework is that decision authority, is that person that's signing their name and saying, yay, verily, this business case is good, it's well supported, we can execute it within the resources that we have. And I'm hoping that that's what comes out of Mr. Parrish's efforts going forward.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up, does VA currently have a structure in place that make you feel confident that they can provide the leadership and oversight needed to make these modernization programs a success?
I think they're working on it. I think there's a lot of catch-up that needs to happen because, as you know, many of these programs are well underway and we've already invested a lot of resources in these programs. And so I'd like to be able to see what the outcomes are of not only the comprehensive supply chain management strategy, but also the continuing evolution of VA's high-risk action plan that directly addresses some of the issues that we've identified as having been challenges to VA's execution of many of its programs.
And then Ms. Oakley, can you provide any examples of actions that VA should take to improve this structure and whether you think that legislative solutions is necessary given the history of VA's issues with modernization and acquisition?
Yeah, legislation may ultimately be necessary, but given all of the good work that's going on right now, all of the commitment that we see, I think I'd probably wouldn't start there immediately. Seeing the outgrowth of VA's plans that it's working on, I think once we see that, once we assess the credibility and the fidelity of those plans and whether or not we think VA is positioning itself for executing in that, we'll be able to weigh in, I think, a little more clearly as to, where they're falling short and where Congress may need to step in to legislate to get some action.
Thank you, Ms. Oakley. In recent program briefing with the Department of Defense on the status of the Logical cloud-based solution, the program manager stated that the efforts to deploy the Logical solution are being greatly aided by the DoD's move and integration to the single Ehrm solution, as well as a single financial management solution. Given the current state of the VA's Ehrm program, have a supply modernization program as well as the financial management modernization program going on all at the same time seems extremely risky. Mr. Parrish, my question is for you, is how are all of these programs being coordinated and integrated at the upper management level?
Well, thank you for that question, Chairman Mervan. As I mentioned, one of the things that we're putting in place and I appreciate the JO and Ms. Oakley's support and recommendations for a lot of these things, but we are putting in place that structure and that oversight to be able to kind of integrate. As I mentioned, one of my key deliverables is to be able to provide an integrated program strategy. And that means that those 3 programs, because each one of them are major undertakings in a normal event, but we're doing this digital transformation together, and we got to make sure they're all working hand in glove. So that's a due out that I'll have the interrelationships and the integrated program strategy amongst all of our programs, current and future.
What are you doing to mitigate risks to the success of the EHRM program and the financial management program if the supply modernization effort continues to have delays?
I'll take that for action to be able to give you more specific details, but I do know that teams are working internally together and collaborating and anticipating. Part of the risk assessment is assessing the likelihood of a risk as well as the severity of a risk, and it's around cost, schedule, performance, as well as what we call programmatic or acts of God, things that are beyond our control, like lawsuits. So we are properly assessing those, and then the teams are anticipating, as a high-performing organization, anticipating where we need to move as a program. So all of those 3 programs are collaborating to assess what they are. I don't have specifics, but we can get back with you on that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. With that, I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. Ranking Member Rosendale, sorry we missed you in round 2. So if you'd like to take up to 10 minutes here, go right ahead for additional questions.
Oh, thank you so much for your generosity, Mr. Chair, but I would never do that to this list of witnesses nor this committee. They would run me out of town. I apologize for, I'm trying to juggle 2 committees at the same time. So that's why I didn't make round 2. You didn't skip me. So I'm going to dive right into my questions. Mr. Parrish, are there any other business cases, analysis of alternatives, or other studies written by the VA or any other party regarding the selection of DIMLs or evaluating its performance that have not been provided to this committee?
I do not know that answer, Ranking Member Rosendale, but I will get you an answer back.
Please go back and check. And unfortunately, I've had a history of requesting information from agencies, and I doubt very seriously if you would be that way, but they have not returned that information to me in a timely fashion. So I would appreciate if we could get this done in 14 calendar days.
I'll do my best. Yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. Kramer, are there any other business cases, analysis of alternatives, or studies written by the VA or any other party regarding selection of DIMLs or evaluating its performance that have not been provided to this committee?
I don't know the answer to that question. As Mr. Parrish said, we'll go back, do that investigation, find them, and provide them.
And again, I would repeat that if you could please have that provided back to this committee within 14 days, it would be greatly appreciated. And then finally, Dr. Evans, the same question to you. Are you aware of any other reports, analysis in regards to these issues?
I'm not personally aware, but I don't know the answer to the question. And like Ms. Kramer, Mr. Parrish, we can together look into that as you best.
Thank you. And again, I would request that we could have that accomplished within 14 calendar days. That way we can take this up before the end of the year. I would greatly appreciate it. Mr. Parrish, Ms. Kramer, Dr. Evans, whose idea was it for the VA to unilaterally decide to cancel its medical, surgical, prime vendor contracts and use the DoD contracts?
Ranking Member Rosendale, I don't have the answer to that because it was before my time. I don't know if Dr. Evans or Ms. Kramer want to add to that, or we'll take that for action.
I don't know.
And I don't have the details, and I don't want to provide any inaccurate information. Let us go back and get the facts for you, sir.
I would greatly appreciate that if we could see that chain of a command and who basically was the one who signed off and thought that this was a good decision to, again, enter VA into this legal spider web of great expense that has not been very productive for us. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will yield back the balance of my time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Ranking Member Rosendale. Chairman Takano, if you're still with us, if you have additional questions, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just I want to ask if there's for any other alternative assessments of solutions outside of the MITRE report. I also want to know if that I'm also interested in the requests for information as asked by Mr. Rosendale and others. So if you would get me that information as well. Mr. Rosendale, you were gone, but my staff confirmed with me what I recollected, which was that Dimmels came as a sort of push from Secretary Wilkie. He came from the Department of Defense as Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. At the time, they knew that this was an issue. This was an issue that they inherited as well, and they thought that Dimmels was a solution, and why not, what DoD does, but not everything was well thought out, and not all the processes, the internal processes were followed. So, but again, I emphasize that I'm not trying to finger any particular party or administration. This has been an ongoing problem, and I really urge all of us to try to pull together in a bipartisan way to get VA on track, not back on track, but on track. So, Ms. Oakley, do you feel that there is sufficient oversight of large acquisitions at VA as it is currently organized?
No, there's definitely not sufficient oversight. And as I mentioned, VA lacks a credible acquisition framework for managing its major acquisitions, and that results in unclear lines of authority and responsibility. And that's part of what is wrong. This kind of framework, I know we talk about frameworks and probably people's eyes glaze over, but it really does provide clarity. It provides opportunities during the life of a program where decision makers can weigh in and make go and no-go decisions based upon fact-based information. And so that really does help to make sure that we're continuing to pursue programs that make sense for the program, for the agency. And I just want to make the point again, when you have a good framework in place that becomes a part of the culture and how they do business, it will ensure that it's followed and that progress transcends changes in leadership.
Now, Ms. Oakley, I think you might have answered this question before, but it seems that you, in the previous answer that you made, that we don't really know exactly who at VA has final authority on large acquisition programs and who exactly can stop a program that is over budget, behind schedule, or is not meeting the requirements of the contract. Is that something that you've kind of said throughout this hearing, or if you have not, is that something you would agree with?
I think it's clear as mud. I mean, I think it's telling that if you ask me, I can't give you a straightforward answer immediately for a number of the programs that we review. And so I think when you have to kind of dig to figure out who's in charge, that means nobody's really in charge. And hopefully,
that nobody's really, the sense that there's nobody really in charge with regard to these acquisitions. It's too diffuse.
Or it's in charge by committee, or leadership by committee, which I think leads to a lack of being able to hold folks accountable.
Okay. So the final decision authority is really, as you say, clear as mud. It's not clear. So I think we've gone on too long waiting for a solution to appear at VA, and I know that GAO is interested in seeing some real changes being made, as I'm sure Mr. Parrish is. And I want to reaffirm my commitment to work with VA. I want to work with VA to find a legislative solution so that we can codify some of the changes that the CAO is putting in place, so we aren't continuing to have these issues in the future. And I get the feeling that we'll have bipartisan buy-in to all of this, and that we can arrive at a solution. Mr. Chairman, this was a really important hearing for you to hold. I want to thank you and Chairman Mervan and the ranking members of each of the committees for this joint oversight hearing. If we can get VI on track, that'll be a major accomplishment. And we are going to do it. We are going to do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Would any of the ranking members or chairs like to provide any closing comments? No, I see a lot of shaking heads there. Okay. I guess we're very thorough with the questioning and the time that members had today, but I just want to thank everyone for joining today's hearing. Look, I think today's hearing clearly underscores that VA's supply chain modernization efforts are needed as urgently as ever, but we know that VA needs a more comprehensive plan for making its medical supplies, and it's got to be a plan that properly includes key stakeholders and ensures that all of these efforts are being properly coordinated and governed. I think the record's pretty clear. VA's had too many unsuccessful attempts at modernization, and we simply have got to get this right. So our subcommittee is going to continue to monitor these programs, as I know others will on the full committee. We all have to work in a bipartisan manner to identify additional ways that Congress can support VA as it transforms its supply chain, and veterans and the VA employees who staff our medical facilities really deserve nothing less. So Mr. Parrish, Ms. Kramer, Mr. Evans, thank you for your testimony. I remain hopeful that over the long term, because of your efforts, we will move to a better place. Please also pass along our thanks to the men and women at the VA who are doing everything possible to stock the supply shelves and make sure that everything is in the right place for VHA and all the veterans that are served by the department. Also, thank you to Ms. Oakley and Ms. Seawright for the work that you do. I think your oversight is so critical for us to understand in real time what's happening at VA and to identify the best path forward. So thank you to everyone who has joined us today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.